All right, we are at 5:30. I'm going to go ahead and kick off tonight's webinar. My name is Tara Du Bois, and I am the Communications Coordinator for the Cape Perpetua Collaborative. And it's been an honor to coordinate the Young Scientist webinar series. We are hosting these presentations the second Tuesday of the month, October through April. And tonight we've got Lindsay Adrian, who's going to talk about the Oregon's Marbled Murrelet Project. And next month, our presentation is on December 8th, and we are going to be hearing about two small predator species around the loss of the ochre sea star in the intertidal area. A little bit about the Cape Perpetua Collaborative. Their mission, our mission, is to foster conservation and collaboration within local communities for scientific exchange, management, awareness, and stewardship from land to sea. Our three guiding principles are community engagement, leveraging resources, and engaging in partnerships. We have a variety of partners from federal agencies, state agencies, some local nonprofits, and the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. Our focus is around the Cape Perpetua Marine Reserve, which stretches from including the marine protected areas, and there are protected waters that stretch from Yachats to Florence. Cape Perpetua Marine Reserve is the biggest of 5 marine reserves in Oregon. And I just want to share one quick fun fact with you about the Marine Reserve is that this site features an isolated deep rocky reef, which is home to a wide variety of groundfish and invertebrates. And if you see here, this red boundary line, within that is the deep isolated rocky reef right here. So all that gray is rocky area. And we organize quite a few community science projects. As you can see here, some of them are seasonal and some of them are monthly. So you can check out our calendar online. We also host, in addition to this webinar series, we host a speaker series on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. November through March. So we've just started that this month. And upcoming, we've got our annual Cape Perpetua Land Sea Symposium on November 19th. That's next week. I'm really excited about the agenda. We've got some really great topics and presenters. I encourage you to go check out our website at capeperpetuacollaborative.org. And if you click on the events tab, you can browse all of the different events we have coming up, check out the agendas, and register accordingly. And also feel free to connect with us on our Facebook page at Cape Perpetua Marine Reserve and our YouTube page at Cape Perpetua Collaborative. I am recording this presentation, and so it will be available for replay on our YouTube channel. And with that, I'm going to introduce Lindsay Adrian. She's the lead faculty research assistant with the Oregon Marbled Murrelet Project. She received her Master's of Science in Wildlife Science from Oregon State University, where her research focused on avian predation of juvenile salmon in San Francisco Bay. And she then spent several years working for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in Tillamook and Salem, working on avian predation issues and implementing the Oregon Conservation Strategy. She is now the lead faculty research assistant on the Oregon's Marbled Murrelet Project. And with that, Lindsay, I am going to stop share and let you take over.
Okay.
Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Let me get my share going. Okay. Does that look okay, Tara?
It looks great.
Okay, great. Well, here we go. Thank you for that introduction, Tara, and thank you to everyone for coming. I hope that I can bring a fun presentation to what was a kind of dreary day here in Oregon. As Tara mentioned, I'm the lead faculty research assistant on the Oregon Marbled Murrelet Project. We are based out of Oregon State University in Corvallis within the College of Forestry. And I'm going to give sort of an overview of the project that we embarked on about 3 years ago. Okay, so just a little bit of history on the marbled murrelet itself. This species is actually the last species to have its nest described by science in North America. For the longest time, nobody knew where these birds nested. So this slide here shows you the title of a paper that was published in the Wilson Bulletin of Ornithology back in September of 1975. That was when the first nest was found in a tree down in California. And it wasn't until 1990 that the first nest was found up here in Oregon. So you can see it hasn't been a very long time that we've even been able to study the nesting habits of this bird. More recently, marbled murrelets have become quite controversial in Oregon. I'm guessing that a lot of the audience tonight is from Oregon, and especially if you're from the coast, you probably have heard of the Elliott State Forest controversy. So this is the state forest that the state put up for sale, and it looked like it was going to be purchased by a private timber company, but the sale was blocked, and now there are negotiations to potentially turn this forest land into a research forest as part of Oregon State University. So we don't know quite yet what the outcome is going to be of that, but people were quite upset with the thought that that this forest could be cut down, and that forest contains quite a lot of marbled murrelet habitat. So whatever the final decision is on the Elliott State Forest really does have potential to affect this species in the state. And then separately, marbled murrelets are listed as threatened under the Oregon's State Endangered Species Act. And back in the winter of 2018, the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission voted to upgrade their listing from threatened to endangered. So that's a more severe listing. But then they subsequently reversed themselves and said that there wasn't enough information to make that decision and that they would leave the birds with their original threatened status. So several environmental groups got together and brought a lawsuit and said that that reversal decision was illegal. And so the bird is still, their status in Oregon is still under review, and it has caused quite a bit of controversy around that. So you can see that it's not just for general interest that we study this bird. It's really a hot topic, and we need to have more information about them so that wildlife managers can manage the population and make good decisions for their conservation. So for this evening, I'm going to focus on 3 things. First, why marbled murrelets are so peculiar. Many people have never heard of them, have never seen them, and really don't know anything about them. So I'll talk a little bit about the bird itself. And then I will move into how it is we go about finding their nests. And then afterwards, what we've learned about them so far over the course of this project. So first off, these birds are pretty widespread along the Pacific Northwest coast. You can see in that range map there, they range from Alaska, the Kodiak Islands of Alaska, all the way down to California. And in the wintertime, you might even find marbled murrelets over the border in the northern part of Baja in Mexico. They are listed as threatened federally under the Federal Endangered Species Act in Oregon, Washington, and California. And then British Columbia also lists them as threatened. They are not threatened in Alaska. The populations up there are doing quite a bit better than they are down in the southern portion of the range. I want to point out on this picture here, this is an adult marbled murrelet in its breeding plumage, which is which is the plumage that they're in the spring and summer breeding season. They're this really beautiful sort of cinnamon brown, and in the winter time when they're not breeding, their plumage changes, and so they'll be dark, almost black on top, and then they'll have a white breast and belly. It's a long-lived species as far as birds go. We don't know exactly how long they live, but it's probably somewhere around 10 to 15 years. And that's good because they only lay one egg per nest. And as far as we know, they only will lay one nest per year if they nest at all. They don't seem to have a very high propensity to breed. So they need to be long-lived in order to make sure that they produce enough offspring to continue the population. They are small. They fit into the palm of your hand. You might have noticed the picture of me holding a murrelet on the poster for the talk, but they can fly at speeds of 60 to 70 miles an hour, and I believe they've even been clocked on radar flying as fast as 90 miles an hour. So they're just this fast little bullet when they're flying through the air. And one fun fact is they're not capable of gliding. They have to keep flapping their wings the entire time they're in the air. They're just this little potato with wings, and honestly, not really the best design for a flying animal. And then they eat forage fish, which are small schooling fish, things like northern anchovy, sand lance, Pacific herring, and then they also do eat some invertebrates like krill. They tend to eat more krill during the winter months and more forage fish during the summer months. But everything that they eat comes from the ocean. They might occasionally forage. They've been documented foraging in inland lakes, like some of our coastal lakes, but typically they stay in the ocean. Murrelets are part of the auk or alcid family, which includes these other birds that you see here. There are tufted puffins, common murres, pigeon guillemots. That's a rhinoceros auklet on the bottom right. And one of the commonalities that these species share is that they do all forage in the ocean for their food. However, they have some slightly different nesting strategies in this family. This picture was taken at the Yaquina Head common murre colony, which some of you are probably familiar with, near the lighthouse there in Newport. This species, they also only lay one egg, but they cluster together and they nest in these colonies really densely packed in there. And they have safety in numbers with that strategy. A species like the tufted puffin, they are a burrow nesting species. And so they're not quite so densely packed in like common murres, but they do share offshore islands and nest in fairly close proximity to one another in their burrows. However, marbled murrelets are a little bit of an outlier in that they, as far as we know, they don't nest colonially. We don't have a great idea of all of their nesting preferences because this is where they nest, in the old coastal forests in Oregon. And it's really difficult to find their nests because of this. So this picture here is of a good looking, what might be a murrelet nest tree in Oregon. This picture was taken by a drone near Yachats. So this is a Douglas fir, and you can see all of those branches that are really nicely covered with moss. A lot of them have good horizontal, sort of flat areas where you could see a bird landing and laying an egg, but the birds don't build a nest at all. They just lay that egg right on top of a branch. So they need pretty thick branches, and then if it has some sort of substrate on there or moss like this, that will prevent the egg from rolling off. Down in Northern California, where marbled murrelets nest in redwood trees, they don't necessarily need moss. They'll just find a nice wide branch and lay the egg right on top of the dirt or other duff that sort of accumulates on top of the branches. So this makes them an outlier in that family. They fly inland, they'll go up to, I think they've been documented even up to 80 kilometers inland nesting, which is a pretty long distance from the ocean. But we don't find, multiple pairs of birds nesting in the same tree. Typically that has been documented in California. So if they are colonial nesters, it's only very loosely. Typically there's one nest per tree, and there aren't very many nests located in close proximity to one another. So here is a picture of what the egg looks like. Their nesting cycle is pretty long. That one egg that they lay has to be incubated for about 4 weeks. And then once the egg hatches, it takes the chick 4, even up to 6 weeks to until it can fledge. They just sit at that nest all by themselves until their feathers come in and they're ready to go. The adults fly back and forth and deliver fish to them, but they just have to sit there and wait until they're ready. The adults are also very secretive. The times of day when they're most active are in the morning and the evening during dawn and dusk. When they're incubating, they almost exclusively come and go during those hours when they switch off incubation duties. So the male and the female take basically equal responsibility for the egg, and they switch off in 24-hour cycles. So one of the adults will incubate that egg for 24 hours. The other adult will come in, usually right around dawn, and switch. And then the first adult will go out to the ocean and feed itself and take in more energy to make up for the fact that it was fasting for those last 24 hours. And then when they switch over, when the chick has hatched and they need to feed the chick, they will come in at all times throughout the day, but they still are the most active during dawn and dusk so that they have that cover of darkness to prevent predators from finding their nests. So these are the predators that are thought to be the most important nest predators. These are corvids, so common ravens, Seller's jays, American crows, gray jays. These are the species that we would expect in Oregon to predate nests. And so part of what our project wanted to look at was exactly that. What is it that's causing nest failure of these birds in the state? So as I've alluded to, the nesting data are limited. We haven't found very many nests since that first one in Oregon was found in 1990. There have only been 29 active nests found in the state since then, up until 2018. And you can imagine that if you only have a data set with 29 items in it, that doesn't really lead to very strong conclusions for questions like, what kind of tree species do these birds prefer? What age class of trees do these birds prefer? Are they okay with small amounts of habitat, or do they need large and contiguous amounts of habitat? It's hard to answer those kinds of questions when you only have 29 nests to look at. So this really was the basis for our project. And then, yeah, there's our logo. That's where we came in. So we have a very large science team because these birds are just very tricky. Jim Rivers is a forest wildlife ecologist. He studies various animal species that rely on forests, so he's my boss. And then all of my other bosses are Matt Betts, he's a landscape ecologist. Both of them are in the College of Forestry at OSU. Kim Nelson, any of you in the audience who are familiar with murrelets in Oregon are probably familiar with Kim. Kim is the state's leading murrelet expert, and so she is a co-principal investigator on our project as well. And then Dan Roby is a seabird biologist with lots of experience in Oregon and elsewhere. And so they really make up our lead PIs, principal investigators. And then we've had two postdocs come through our project, Joe Northrup and Sofia Garcia Heras. The two of them both worked on spatial analysis of the movement data that we collect on the birds. Jen Guerrero is our program manager, and then myself, Ethan Woodis, and John Dockenhouse are the three faculty research assistants. And honestly, for such a tiny bird, it's amazing that it takes this many people, but this is only the tip of the iceberg. And once I explain our field methods, you'll understand, I think, a little bit better why so many people are needed to study this bird. Okay. So here's where we get into some fun pictures. I'll explain for you now how it is that we go about finding marbled murrelet nests. The first part is we have to catch the birds so that we can follow them. So we use the Marine Mammal Institute's research vessel, the Pacific Storm. We do all of our captures out of Newport. We depart the port of Newport in the evening around 7 p.m. And we do this in the month of May. So this is what the back deck of the Pacific Storm looks like as we're on our way out. The small inflatable Zodiac that you see there on the back deck, that's our actual capture vessel. And so here is our capture crew. Now, you probably wouldn't believe it, but these are actually expert murrelet catchers. They come from the California Institute of Environmental Studies. We have them come up every year from California, but these guys have worked in Alaska, Japan, and all up and down the West Coast, and they actually specialize in catching murrelets and doing research on not just marbled murrelets, but there are a couple other species of murrelets as well. And so the setup here is the person in the front of the boat is the netter. You can see it's just a big salmon net. The person in the middle is the spotlighter. In this picture here, Terrell's holding that black spotlight. The cooler in between them does not contain beer, as you might think, but that actually holds the battery that powers that spotlight. Those blue boxes are just collapsible pet carriers, and that's what we use to transport the birds. And then the person in the back is the driver. So they, we send them off into the darkness, and we just listen and wait to hear the radio. Oh no, the picture disappeared. Well, all the picture was them coming back in the dark. If we're lucky, they go out, and once they use that spotlight to find birds sitting on the water, then they hold the spotlight on the bird so that the bird can't see them coming, and then they net it and hopefully bring it back to us. And so this is what the murrelet looks like. This bird, you can still see it has a good bit of white in its plumage, so it's still in the process of molting from its winter non-breeding plumage into its spring and summer breeding plumage. And so we bring the birds back to the research vessel, and then we can do the processing. And the processing involves taking measurements. We weigh them, we measure the wing chord, and then we put a small metal band on their leg, and each metal band has a unique number on it, so that if we were to recatch the bird, or if someone else was to recatch the bird, we'd be able to identify the individual. We also take a blood sample, and then this is my coworker John, who on this particular night had the honor of filling the position that we lovingly refer to as the fecal engineer. Basically, that just means he was the lucky one who got to scoop the poop out of all of the pet carriers when they come in. If we can get the poop sample from the birds, we can actually analyze those for DNA and get an idea of what they're eating, which is really cool. We have a collaborator who's working on that. We're not doing that directly on our project. And then the last part of the process is we affix a radio transmitter. So this is the radio transmitter. It weighs about 2.5 grams, and it's a VHF transmitter. So it works just the same way as regular old radio does. It emits just a beep that you can't hear just with your ears. You have to listen on a VHF receiver, but it emits beeps at 30 pulses per minute, and each bird has a unique frequency, so we can tune our receiver and know which individual we're listening to. And if you just note on this picture here, this bird is in the full breeding plumage, and you can see it's got that beautiful cinnamon brown color, and this is what helps them blend in the forest. And then in the winter, when they don't need to have that camouflage in the forest, they'll go back to the black and white, which is much better in the ocean habitat. So then the real work begins. Once we catch all of our birds, then we move on to the telemetry portion. And we have about 45 telemetry stations designated along the coast. We have a route set up between Pacific City and Florence. And we have a team of technicians. Usually we hire between 10 and 15 seasonal technicians who drive up and down Route 101 and stop at all these stations to listen for the birds. And what we're doing here is basically taking a daily roll call. We're looking for the attendance patterns of the birds on the water, because that's the easiest place for us to find them. When a bird, so our goal is every single day, find the birds on the water. And then when an individual starts to go missing, then we start to pay attention to the pattern of that bird's absences. If it's absent on a regular 24-hour cycle, on the water for one day, gone for one day, back on the water for one day, gone the next day. That's how we know that it has started nesting, because it has initiated that 24-hour incubation pattern with its mate. So here are all of our stations that you can see. We go to them every day. We set up our antennas, as you see in the picture here, and we just check the birds off. Once we get a bird that's showing that on-off pattern, then we get up in the airplane, and the airplane will confirm, no, I don't hear the bird on the water, and then just start searching inland, just doing transects back and forth along the coastal, over the coastal forest. The tricky thing here is that once they find a nest location inland, they'll take a GPS point, but unfortunately, that doesn't actually tell us exactly what tree the nest is in. So this now starts the next process, the next part of the process. We go in on the ground, we take our telemetry equipment, and we go to that location that the plane has given us, and then we start listening for the bird from the ground, and we try to fine tune that location down to a tree. Usually what we end up with looks like this. The radio signal gets us close, but not close enough so that we identify just one tree. We usually end up thinking, okay, we're very close. It's probably one of these handful of trees. So then we're now at the limits of what the electronics can do for us, and we have to use our own eyes and ears. So we go in, we flag a trail so that we know where we're going. We go in at about 3 o'clock in the morning, well before the sun rises, because remember, the birds are most active at dawn. That's when they're most of the time when they're doing those incubation switches. And we stand there, we look up and try to find those gaps in the canopy where you can still see some sky. And we just stand there and hope to see that bird flying by at 60 miles an hour landing in a tree. And really, it looks more like this when you're doing that. It's very dark. I mean, we arrive and it's pitch black. We set people up at various stations around the tree that we think is the tree where the nest might be. And we just hope that we see or hear the birds come in. Usually it takes us 3 or 4 days of doing this to feel like we know which tree it's in. And at that point, we can call in the tree climber, the next step in the process. Hopefully the tree climber only has to climb once and is able to find the nest. We don't always get it right the first time, but we've got a pretty good record on that. We're not actually able to climb the exact nest tree. We're not allowed in the tree while the birds are in there nesting. So the tree climber climbs an adjacent tree and uses binoculars to try to spot where the nest is, and then installs one of these really cool security cameras. So these cameras, they're pretty high powered security cameras like you'd see on the exterior of a building. The tree climber goes up into the tree, installs the camera, tries to camouflage it, as you can see here, with moss all over it, and then winds a cord down to the bottom, a cable down to the ground, where we have a box that has the 12-volt battery and all of our other electronics in it. And we get about 5 or 10 minutes of Wi-Fi signals in this fancy system, and then we're able to use a tablet to set the zoom and the zoom and the focus on the camera, and then we shut the box up and we let it record. These systems take so much power that unfortunately we can only record for 3 days until the battery dies, at which point we then have to hike in. These poor technicians, we really work them hard, and we have to switch out that battery, which weighs 35 pounds. So it's no simple feat, and keep in mind we're not hiking on established trails. So some people think this is the fun part, and some people really hate this part of what we do. But we let that camera record until the end of the season, and the nest hopefully fledges a chick. Okay, so that's the whole process, and now I'll share with you what we've been learning over the last few years. So we catch birds in April, or we do better usually in the month of May. So we've dropped off the April captures now. And over 2017, 2018, and 2019, we captured a total of 237 murrelets, and we were able to put 190 tags on those birds. There is a weight limit that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has designated. So a bird needs to weigh at least 200 grams for us to put a tag on it. And this map here, the yellow dots just show you examples of where we've caught birds. That was in 2017. So we focus our efforts between Lincoln City and Cape Perpetua because those are the limits of basically how far we can get in a night when we turn either north or south from Newport. We do our best to spread our captures out over that area because our goal is to catch a random sample of birds that are nesting in Oregon so that we can find a random sample of nests on various types of, in various habitats or land ownerships. So in 2017, what was very shocking was that none of our birds nested. We're not the first project to put radio tags on marbled murrelets, far from it. And no other project that we know of has been skunked like we were. None of our birds nested, and this was apparently due to the poor ocean conditions in that year. And then the second thing that was shocking was that some of our birds actually moved 350 miles or farther from where we had captured it in Oregon. So what we expected was that birds would not necessarily stay, right very close to where we captured them, but we thought they would at least stay within the borders of the state, more or less. But in fact, we had birds that went as far south as about San Francisco Bay in California, and as far north as Cape Flattery at the northern tip of Washington. We were not able to fly into Canada, so it's entirely possible that birds went even farther north. This is important because it really has significant implications for the way that the marbled murrelet population is monitored. So on this map, you see I have some zones numbered, zones 1 through 5. And the way that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife monitors their population, because they are a threatened species, is zones 1, 3, and 5 are they do at-sea surveys counting murrelets every other year, and then that's in the even years, and then in the odd years they do surveys in zones 2 and 4. So what we found is that birds are not necessarily staying in their quote unquote home zone. And if you have birds that were caught in zone 3, like we did, where a survey is happening 1 year, but they leave and go to zone 2, then they would be missed in the year that they're being counted in zone 3. Or possibly they could be double counted if they leave in zone 3, go to zone 5, and then come back to zone 3 in the same year. And we did document those types of movements. So this is really important for the population monitoring and not at all what we expected to see. So I mentioned ocean conditions earlier as possibly being the reason why we saw these movements and why we didn't have any nesting. So you may remember something referred to as the warm blob, and that was in 2014, 2015, and 2016. We had this anomalous, really warm water along the coast of Oregon called the blob that really changed what was happening in the food web. So the bottom of the food web, the phytoplankton, all those little plants just weren't there, and the whole food web got upended. You know, it starts with the nutrients and it works its way up. And so in 2017, although the warm blob had mostly dissipated, there was what some of the oceanographers call a hangover effect. There was still a good bit of warm water, and the upwelling that usually brings in all the good nutrients and supports this food web, the upwelling wasn't able to get through. So in 2017, there was a record low catch of salmon, and then those important forage fish that support the upper level predators like Pacific herring and smelt, those fish were at really low levels. And so we think that the murrelets were affected by this and had to range farther to go find food, and that possibly affected their breeding decisions and made them decide not to go inland that year. So in our subsequent years, 2018 and 2019, the ocean conditions did improve, but we ended up seeing similar types of movements. We didn't do as many flights because the birds were keeping us busy, but we did still fly up to Washington and down to California, and we found birds in 2018 and 2019 going almost as far as they had in 2017. Again, we weren't able to fly into Canada, so we don't know how much farther north they were going, but we did fly in Puget Sound in Washington and didn't find any birds in there. So the birds do seem to be sticking to the outer coast, but they're ranging far and wide and not just staying in Oregon like we expected. Luckily, 2018 and 2019, we did have nesting. We found 12 active nests, and 5 of those actually did fledge chicks. So the successful nests are here in white, and the failed nests are in red, and then 2018 is denoted by the circles, and 2019 is in the triangles. And so I mentioned earlier that we catch birds at sea, first because that's the easiest place to find them, but second because we want a random sample of nests to in order to find we want a random sample of birds so that we can find a random sample of nests. We're hoping to get nests on different types of habitats and on different land ownerships, but so far all 12 of those nests have been found on the Siuslaw National Forest, and this was something of a surprise to us. However, that land ownership is here in the green outline, and you can kind of see in this aerial photo that that's where the largest chunks of unbroken habitat are. And so we don't quite have the sample size yet to be able to do a landscape type of analysis. But it's possible that that is one of the things that birds need. We don't know yet, but they are going to where these big chunks of habitat are. So I have more pretty pictures for you. I'm sure you're wondering what a murrelet nest looks like. So take a look at this photo and see if you can pick out the murrelet. This is a western hemlock, and this nest that I'll highlight right here. Did you get it right? There's the bird kind of in the shadows. This nest is actually on a mistletoe deformity. So this was a mistletoe infection on the western hemlock tree, and that's what's causing those branches to sort of come out of a cluster in all different directions. But it formed a really nice platform for that bird. And I'll just zoom in here. You can just see the bird's, the antenna from the bird's radio transmitter right here. But that bird has a nice cozy spot, lots of moss, really good spot to put an egg. This is another nest that we found. You can see that that branch is quite a bit smaller than that mistletoe deformity. This was on a Douglas fir, which is the tree species that we found most of our nests on. Again, this bird has a little bit of moss. These two nests happen to be in fairly close to the trunk of the tree, but that's not always the case. And then this one was really exciting. Can you spot the nest on this tree? This is the big leaf maple tree, another native tree to Oregon. But we had not, we were not expecting this to be a nest tree species, because it's not been, marbled murrelets have been documented nesting in a big leaf maple before, but only up in British Columbia, not down here in Oregon. But there's the nest there. And I did not believe the field technicians when they told me, yes, we did our dawn survey. We found the bird. It's flying into this big leaf maple. And I said, no, it's not. Go back tomorrow. It must be the Douglas fir tree that's behind. And I don't think they were too happy with me. They went back and then they said again, no, it's really going in the maple tree. And sure enough, it was. And again, you can see that's like a almost perfectly horizontal branch, covered with lots of nice moss. And the big leaf maple, you know, those leaves are so big. I just can imagine that this bird probably chose this spot because there was so much coverage. It would be really difficult for a predator to see in and find that nest. Okay, so hopefully these videos will work for all of you. I'll try to describe what's happening in case anyone has a slow internet connection. But I'm going to show you some footage now from those nest cameras. This first one is just going to be some egg incubation behavior, but it's also neat because I'm starting with the shot zoomed out, and this will show you how powerful those cameras are. They can zoom in to about 30 meters. So as I mentioned before, we're not allowed to climb the actual nest tree. So this is an adjacent tree where the tree climber thought he'd have a good view of the nest tree, and he was able to get a direct line of sight. And then this is what it looks like when you zoom in. So give it just a second here. And there you go. It's zooming in. And then there's the bird, and that's that mistletoe nest that I described. If you look closely, all you see is the bird blinking, not moving, and that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all that happens at these nests while the birds are incubating. Okay, here's the next one. This is that same nest. This is now in black and white because those cameras have infrared capability, and that's how we continue recording footage at night when it's dark. And so you'll see, I'm pressing play now, you can see the eye shine from the eye, the bird is blinking, and the mate is going to come in here. There it comes, came in from the ocean. This is about 4:30 in the morning. And they're going to switch. That first bird is getting off the egg, and the second bird is going to take its place. And that first bird, there it goes, boop, back out to the ocean to fish and recharge itself from that 24 hours of fasting while it was sitting on the nest. Okay, so here's another nest. This one has a chick in it. You'll see the chicks when they are at the nest. The adults only stay for a day or two right when the nest hatches, but then the adults leave and they only come back to feed the fish to the chick. So the chicks are just this big fat brown spotted puffball of down, and when the adults come in, it begs. So you'll see the chick here is waving its head back and forth. It's probably calling. We don't have any sound on the videos, so you're not hearing anything. But there you can see it took the fish from the adult. They're still, the chick is still talking to the adult, I guess. The adult leaves. And then if we keep watching, if you give it just a second, the chick, you'll see it sort of turn and start to choke that fish down. Thinking about it. There you go, get it in. So that's what a chick feed looks like. I think I mentioned earlier, the adults will deliver fish during the day. They are still more active during dawn and dusk, but they will bring in fish over the course of the day to the chick. And again, both adults, both the male and the female, are participating in that. And then we have documented quite a few different nest visitors at these nests. So let's take a look at this video. This is that same chick that we just saw eat a fish. Sitting there, not much going on. There's and it meets its untimely demise. I'll play that again, and maybe anybody who's a birder can try to take a guess at what that bird was who comes in. So there's that chick again, just sitting there, and boom, the end. So that was a red-tailed hawk, and that was not on the list of nest predators that I showed you earlier in this presentation. We expected the jays and ravens and crows to be our nest predators. Those are the birds that have been documented before. Red-tailed hawks have not been documented as a nest predator. So that's another new thing that we found on this project. And again, could be really important for managers as they're trying to figure out how to manage for these birds and what the habitat characteristics are that they need to nest successfully. I mentioned we did have some other unexpected nest visitors. Luckily, they've all been fairly non-threatening at this point. We have documented some Steller's jays on camera interacting with adults that were sitting incubating or with chicks. And in those instances, the adult or the chick gets really upset and kind of starts screaming at the jay, and the jay eventually just leaves, and we haven't had any predation events related to those species. And then we've had other visitors like chickadees, and a hairy woodpecker showed up at one of our nests, an American robin at one point. So we get to see some kind of really interesting stuff on these videos. So just a few take-home points for you today. We have increased the number of active nests found in Oregon by 40%. We've only found 12 nests, and that might not sound like a lot, but when there were only 29 nests prior to that, that has increased our sample size quite a bit, and we're hoping that pretty soon we'll be able to start conducting some analysis to look at some of those questions. We have found new information on the diversity of tree species that murrelets use in Oregon for nesting. That big leaf maple, again, was a surprise to us. The other species that we've documented so far are just the western hemlock and the Douglas fir, which were species that we expected to see. But then we also identified a new nest predator, which was not what we were hoping for. But that red-tailed hawk it's good to have that positively identified and on the record, so that decisions can be made, and we can look at the habitat of red tails and try to figure out what the best scenario is for murrelets to nest successfully. And then we're making more connections on what the importance of ocean conditions are for these birds, and what conditions are needed in the ocean for them to move inland and to nest. Where we think at this point that we do have a paper that came out recently where we looked at bird occupancy of coastal forests and how that occupancy changed in years of differing ocean conditions. And we did find that in years of poor ocean conditions, the places where we saw decreased occupancy were forests that were farther from the coast and that didn't have as much old forest, like old growth forest in them. So we're starting to uncover some of these patterns, and we'll be working on that more. And then also that the movements of the birds during the breeding season is something else that again took us by surprise, but is really important, especially for the population monitoring that is done. Knowing not only the size of the population, but what the population trends are, is one of the basic facts that you need to be able to effectively manage a species and create or decide on conservation actions for a species. So hopefully this will help Fish and Wildlife Service and other groups as they are figuring out how to monitor this bird more effectively. And so that's all that I have for this evening. Check out our website, OregonMarbled.org. You can link to some of the papers that we've put out there and just read more about our research. I want to quickly thank our funders. We receive all of our funding from the Forest Research Laboratory at Oregon State University. So, and that funding comes from the state of Oregon. So this is a homegrown project, and hopefully will benefit conservation of this species in the state. And there's my contact information if anyone had any specific questions or anything like that. But as long as Tara says it's okay, I think that we have time for questions this evening as well.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. That was very informational, and those videos are just the cutest thing ever. One of the comments was it's stunning footage, and it truly is. We do have a few comments that came, or questions that came in, and I want to kick it off with one about your inspiration. What inspired you to research a bit deeper into the marbled murrelet?
Yeah, good question. For me personally, I have wanted to study murrelets for a really long time. I'm a seabird biologist. I've studied other seabirds, but these birds are so enigmatic, and to not know hardly anything about their nesting to me is shocking. That you know, we know so much about everything on our planet. It's like, how do we not know anything about this bird? So for me personally, that's why I wanted to be involved. And then I think that for as far as the creation of this project, it really is because this is a hot topic in Oregon. Some people don't pay that much attention to wildlife, but the state relies, you know, heavily on the forest products industry, and those folks need answers to be able to go about their business, but also adhere to protections of threatened and endangered species. And so that's really what sparked this project itself, was to be able to get the answers that people need.
That's awesome. Not knowing so much about an animal must bring so much excitement every time you learn something new. I mean, you
Every
just listed
time.
even a few things, just in the last few years. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, every
Okay,
time.
so I'm going to get to our questions now. Here's
Okay.
one. Have glue on GPS units been considered? Is the canopy cover too dense to get an accurate fix on the nests?
Yeah, great question. Every year we go back and we revisit all of the tagging companies to see who has new products that might work for us. Last year, I actually tried it wasn't a GPS tag, it was another VHF tag, but I tried gluing tags onto the birds' tails. And the tag we use now is 2.5 grams. That tag was only 1 gram. It was tiny. It was like the size of the tip of my pinky, basically. And they all fell off or the birds pulled them off. Back in 2016, before I was on this project, they did a pilot study to see if a GPS tag was an option. But right now, the smallest tag that's available is called a PTT tag, and those weigh about 5 grams, so twice the tag that we currently use. And unfortunately, they did not work out. They're pretty big. It's just like a rectangle. They don't really look like they're that hydrodynamic or aerodynamic. The placement was the same as the tags that we use now, but we think that they were still too heavy for the birds is the first problem. And the second problem is that that particular type of tag didn't have the resolution to actually help us find nests. It seems like having a GPS tag that is really small would be something that would be easy to do, but unfortunately it's not. And we're limited right now by the size of the battery. The electronics are small enough, but the battery is not. And so you really need a solar panel to go with it. And it's just, nobody can get them small enough yet for us to use. So I keep looking and I keep coming up empty.
Well, technology will continue to astound us. So someday.
Yep. Someday.
Are the captured birds as docile as they seem in the photos? How do their moods compare to other auks?
Oh, I don't think docile would be the word I would use, but typically they're pretty calm. We keep them in that pet carrier when they're being transported from in the Zodiac back to the research vessel. And then once we get them on the research vessel, we keep ourselves quiet. We have the lights off inside the cabin of the ship. We work just with our headlamps, and then we usually keep a cloth over the bird's head, and that does really well at keeping them calm. Occasionally we get a loud bird. It's interesting because a lot of times when we find them on the water, they'll be with their mate. We find them in pairs, and we're pretty sure that most of the time that is their mate. And sometimes we'll get a bird that just keeps calling to its mate, and you can hear its mate out on the water calling back, and it scares the heck out of you because they're loud. But most of the time they're calm and they're quiet, and I have been bitten by a couple, but they're not they don't draw blood or anything. They're very small, and yeah, they're not scary, and they're pretty easy to work with if you can catch them.
Are marbled murrelets monogamous, and what is the percentage of males to females?
Ooh, I don't know about the percentage of males to females. We typically catch a pretty equal proportion, and so I'm guessing that means their population is fairly evenly distributed, but I guess I don't know for sure, and I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that. The birds, males and females are identical, so you cannot tell just by looking at them what the sex of that bird is. We can figure out the sex because we take a little blood sample from them, and so that's how we sex them, and that's how I know what the spread is on our birds. The first part of that question was, are they monogamous? We don't know. What we do know is that they have fairly high site fidelity, which means that they return to their breeding area every year. We think that Oregon birds are, Oregon breeders stay and come back to Oregon to breed every season. And we also believe that they have fairly high nest site fidelity. So although they might not return to the exact same nest every year, they may return to the same tree or the same stand, the same sort of group of trees. So we do know that, but we don't know if they're exactly, perfectly monogamous or not. I think that if they're coming back to the same place, then there's probably a good chance that they are fairly monogamous. But unfortunately, because they're so hard to catch, and they're so hard to track, we just don't have that information on the individual level. Each bird does get a metal leg band that has an individual numeric code on it. So when we recapture a bird, we can identify, oh, this was one we caught in a previous year, but there's a limit to how much information we get out of that.
And then this is kind of a two-pronged question. I'm kind of combining a couple here because they kind of go together from
Sure.
sea to land. How deep do marbled murrelets known to dive for their food? And then how far inland do they nest? And then just a caveat to that, as far as the pronunciation of murrelet, how do you pronounce it specifically? Because it shows here they've heard it murrelet.
Yep.
So like clarify that.
Yeah, I will try. I'm not positive. I hear some people say Murrelet, and I hear some people say Murrelet, and I personally say both. So I don't know that there is one correct way. What was the first part of that question? I already forgot. Oh, how far inland do they nest?
And how deep do they dive?
And how deep do they dive? I think that the farthest inland nest that's been documented, I think, was 80 kilometers from the ocean. I think that's right. And then, but in Oregon, it's more like, I want to say, I don't know about a nest, but they have been documented as far inland as Mary's Peak, here outside of Corvallis, which I think is about 50 kilometers. Is that right? But somewhere between 30 and 50. I mean, they'll nest close to the water as well, but somewhere between 30 and 50 is probably a more regular range. And then how deep do they dive? If I remember right, I think it's about 20 meters or so. They are smaller than common murres, for example, and murres will dive deeper. They do more like 50 meters. So they tend to stay pretty close in to shore. Most of when we fly in the airplane, we do collect, relatively precise locations of the birds on the water, and the farthest one offshore that we collected was about 7 kilometers, but that was something of an outlier. Almost all of them are within 2 to 3, maybe 4 kilometers, so it's really within the first mile or two of the shore.
Amazing for such a little creature.
I know.
Do you know of any marbled murrelets in captivity in Oregon?
There are not. Murrelets have, I think Kim Nelson, one of our principal investigators, has some experience with this. occasionally marbled murrelet does wash up and is taken to rehab or whatever. Situations like that do happen, but these birds do not do well in captivity. Kim had told me about a time, it wasn't recently, but in the past, when I want to say there were 2 marbled murrelets that were taken to the Oregon Coast Aquarium, found washed up or something like that, and they just don't like it. They don't respond well. They're really just not meant to be captive. So that's another reason why we don't know that much about them, because you're not able to even study them in like an aquarium or zoo type setting.
And then can you speak to edge effects and buffer issues? So like an old growth forest, kind of having that buffer between maybe clear cuts or something like that may occur.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and we're hoping to get there. Right now, we just have those 12 nests that we found on our project, so we haven't done any landscape type of analysis quite yet, but those are absolutely questions that we're planning on asking. We want to know what size, what is the habitat that they really prefer in the state, and then what are things that affect their successful nesting, like are there edge effects. If you get a clear cut, some of the common wisdom goes that if you get a clear cut, that allows predators to move in and penetrate the old forest more deeply than they did before, or that it can create habitat for more predators, and then any murrelet nests that are close to the edge might be more susceptible to predation. That's kind of the prevailing, maybe not prevailing, but that's a hypothesis that some people have, but right now we don't know the answer to that question. So stay tuned. We will get there eventually.
And then, so you spoke to how deep the birds go in the water. What is their priority species, prey species that they're going after?
That's a great question. We don't know. Let's see. There have been a few. I mentioned that we collect the poop samples from the birds and we send those off to a collaborator. So the results that they've showed us so far showed basically a lot of those forage fish species that we were expecting to see do show up in the diet. So it was things like northern anchovy, some different smelt species, like probably surf smelt, Pacific herring, I said anchovy, sand lance. Pacific sand lance is thought to be one of the higher ones. We haven't had quite enough of those poop samples yet to get great answers. We had a couple interesting things like rockfish species show up, but I think it's more likely to be mostly things like herring, anchovy, sand lance as the most predominant species. And then they also do turn their attentions to invertebrates like krill, but we think they do that a bit more in the winter when you don't have as much upwelling and as many forage fish in the system, but we're not quite sure on that.
And then just a couple more questions we'll end with. How long do you leave the radio tags on the birds?
Oh, right. I forgot to say that. So the batteries on those radio tags last about 90 days. We've had a few that have lasted over 100 days. The way that we attach those transmitters, there's a little metal prong that comes off the front. It basically looks like a paper clip that's been folded into a little triangle arrow shape. We poke a hole in the bird's skin and slide that prong underneath, and then we use a suture, like if you were to get stitches, we use a suture to attach the back end of the tag. The suture eventually wears away. The purpose of that is just to hold the tag in place long enough so that the the site where we insert the prong can heal. The prong is really what holds the tag on. So that suture wears away, and then eventually the skin will actually just push the prong out of the skin, kind of like if you were to get a deep splinter and you couldn't pull it out yourself. Your skin will eventually eject it on its own, and that's what happens to our birds. We had one nesting bird whose tag fell off before the end of the season. Luckily, we were not happy about that, because then we lost we weren't able to keep collecting movement data, but we did have a camera already set up on that nest. So we were able to keep following the nest, but the bird's tag had fallen off. Usually they fall off over sometime in the fall or over the winter. And that's been based on other projects where they've recaptured birds. We've recaptured, I think, 2 birds that we had put radio tags on in prior years, and there was no sign of the radio tag at all. There was no scar, no missing feathers, nothing. So yeah, hopefully we get our 90 days in, but we have had at least that one fell off sooner than that. So.
And then does it matter if they're molting about your ability to attach them or effectiveness of it? And I'm assuming they can still swim and fly as well.
Yes. So some of the birds that we catch, like that one I showed in the photo, are still in the process of molting. It makes it harder for us to put the tag on just because their feathers are so fine, and when they're still molting, they're sort of coming out and it's hard to see what you're doing. And so we will often just not put a tag on a bird if it hasn't finished molting into its breeding plumage, but it doesn't affect the attachment of the tag or the efficacy of the tag or anything like that. Was there another part of that question?
That they can still fly and swim.
Yes, yeah, and that's that's a big reason why we use the tags that we use, because they've been proven to work on other projects, and we think that anything that's a different shape or a heavier weight or anything like that is maybe not going to work as well. The tag that I tried on the tail, because of studies that have been done on aerodynamics and hydrodynamics, the tail is another good spot if you're going to place a transmitter on a bird. But I think the birds just didn't tolerate it and pulled them off. So that didn't work out. Where we put it now, it's behind their neck, right at the upper part of their back. And we put it there so that they can't reach it and pull it off.
Oh.
But it is still in that placement. It is still going to be hydro and aerodynamic for them.
All right, last question. Great questions, everybody. Thank you for submitting them. Last one, what kind of volunteer help could you use to expand your project, and how can the public get involved in researching them?
Yeah, so the best way to get involved is through the Audubon Society. They have a training every year, and this is a great way to get to see Murrelets also. They have a training every year at Cape Perpetua, and that's part of a citizen science effort. You get trained how to spot the birds, both usually they then also in the campground, so you can see the birds flying overhead. We currently don't have volunteer opportunities. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, our 2020 field season was canceled. Occasionally, when we collect our video data, we do have need for video reviewers, but right now we don't have much going on, so I don't have anything fun to share for that. But Audubon Society, it's through the Portland Audubon Society that they do that training. It's usually in July every year.
And you can also find out more about that project on our website closer to the time as
Oh,
well. We will list it on the collaborative website as Portland Audubon is one of our partners.
perfect.
And so it's a really great project. They do it over 2 different sessions now. It's become so popular.
Yeah.
And it's just really kind of magical from the experiences that I've heard people talk about.
Yeah.
It's a very early morning project.
Yes. Yeah. Hmm.
So definitely encourage you to start checking that out around May or June, and you can probably get more information about that. Again, with COVID, like Lindsay mentioned, there may be adjustments. Last season, there was just a virtual training and then a very, very small group that went out to do a survey.
Yeah.
So it will depend, and we'll see where we're at next summer.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
with that, Lindsay, I just want to say thank you so much for this awesome presentation this evening. So much new information. I thought I had known so much about murrelets, and I'm still continue to learn more.
Yeah.
And it's exciting.
Yep. Thank you so
um,
much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be able to share
yeah.
what we're working on.
And for those who are attending, I will be posting this video on YouTube if you're interested in a replay, and feel free to share it as well. And with that, check out our calendar and hope to see you at a future event. Have a great evening, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.